This is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Program Director for Communication, Media, and Ethics at Mid-America Christian University. I'm here with our Asynchronous Interview, number 2. And our guest in the course, Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements, COM 4603, is Brian Neff. Brian Neff comes to us with an array of background experiences, and this ranges from everything from podcasting to expertise as a video game enthusiast, but he's also gained quite the portfolio as a tabletop game designer. And so Brian works with a number of clients across many channels, regular convention attendee, and all around creative. But he's coming to us here, executive consultant, a freelance operator. So get your ideas ready, people. Maybe you can send those in afterward and network a little bit with Brian. So without further ado, Brian, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We appreciate having you in. And again, as a healthy recap, our Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements course, in addition to having a lot to say in its title, emphasizes some core areas of interest in our communication program. We have the benefit, at least from my perception, of getting to study not only media studies, but also social media in the major, and then in between the media studies, social media studies, we look at public relations, marketing, advertising, everything in between, because it's all interconnected now. And I'm sure you could kind of speak to that, but rather what we want to understand is the students work on some core skills in this class. The sort of the art and craft of question writing, but also working on our professionalism, working on ways to communicate our voice in digital spaces. So we're excited to have you join us in a digital space here to field some of these questions.
Absolutely.
Brian, do you want to give us any kind of additional background about yourself? Is there anything that sort of, well, I don't want to step on any student questions because I do think we have a couple of origin-based questions from the students. So if it works with you, we can jump right over to some of those questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. We're going to draw from, if I can get the page moved over here. Let's begin with a question from student Destiny. Okay. And most of our students have a bit of a 2-part question. And what I'll do is, whenever they allow that organic pause, I will pause the video in between, kind of allow us to tackle these one at a time, and then if they run close together, it's intentionally so, and we'll let them finish that out.
Cool.
All right.
My name is Destiny Jackson, and I just have 2 quick questions for you. So my first question is, how did you get into tabletop gaming development? And then my second question is, describe exactly what tabletop gaming is and what it is you do for them.
All right.
So I originally got into tabletop game development when I was actually still in college, and I was doing a lot of volunteer work, I think, more than anything else. I was going around and helping people, move large boxes and do things like that, and I was sort of being a roadie to a couple of other, larger companies out there. And I eventually transitioned that into some paid work while I was, doing some other things, while I was still in college. And then that slowly transitioned into having enough clients to have full-time work and things like that. So really a pretty generic path whenever it comes to freelancing. I think a lot of freelancers will tell you, it started as sort of a side gig and then slowly built it up to be this thing that you can do full-time. So tabletop gaming is an expansion of a lot of the tabletop games that have been really famous for the past 50 years. Things like, Monopoly and Trouble and Risk and all of that sort of stuff. And there was a really big explosion in tabletop games that happened about 15 years ago now, in somewhere between 2002 and 2004, where a lot of the technology and techniques that it took to create tabletop games became a lot cheaper and became available to a lot more people. And so tabletop gaming, between then and now, has exploded into a lot of large companies and even more smaller companies. And my job as a developer is I take a lot of those ideas that smaller companies have, and sometimes larger companies, depending on their needs, and I help them craft those ideas into products. So a lot of times what people have is really, really good ideas with no idea how to get them onto store shelves or do things like that. So I take a lot of the middle ground that is between a good idea and a store shelf, and I sort of build the bridges in between. And sometimes that's doing a lot of work myself. Sometimes that's getting into touch with a lot of other contractors, things like graphic design and illustration and product marketing and things like that. And so, having a network is sort of part of my job.
Excellent. And for those, a little bit of orientation for our audience. I do have a follow-up question, but I want to plug maybe a direct understanding for the very novice here. What is tabletop gaming? I know we think of, there's traditional board games that we see in all the stores we grow up playing, but what's the difference, if there is any, between tabletop gaming versus board games?
So board games are sort of a subsection of tabletop gaming. Tabletop games include board games for sure, but they also include things, like card games. So if you're talking about, bridge and hearts and all of that sort of stuff, those types of games fall under there, as well as role-playing games. So things like Dungeons and Dragons and, those types of games also fall under that umbrella as well.
Okay. We talk about, and not only in our creating social media presence course, but other classes, about the strength and importance of networking and how this is a key ingredient to sort of moving through channels. You've described this as you call it a quote unquote generic path, but how does Brian network, or what are maybe some key ways that we could think outside the box about being able to approach people with the right kind of maybe attitude or questions in professional situations?
Sure. Most of my networking gets done at professional events, so the things that you were talking about, gaming conventions. There are a lot of those that happen all over the country, and so I probably travel to 12 of those a year. Going in and having that travel schedule and being able to meet face-to-face is very, very valuable. But, there are people who do what I do that are in Australia and Japan and, a lot of other countries. So there have been a lot of strides within the past couple of years to build online networks and online communities through Facebook and Twitter and all of those different places. Google does a really good job of providing tools that help that out, so that people can sort of telecommute in order to build a network and have an online presence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so a typical convention, what does that look like?
It looks like a lot of wall-to-wall meetings for me, but generally in tabletop gaming, a lot of the conventions are consumer shows. So it'll be companies setting up booths with a lot of products, and then people who pay to come in, wandering the convention halls, buying things, playing games, and generally having a good time.
Okay. Excellent. Sounds only slightly more engaging than an academic conference by a lot, by a considerable margin. Let's hop over to a different question, asking about some of these questions that orient us about your profession. I was thinking one of our interviewers had questions that dealt with some of your earliest experiences. And so that might be a good place to pivot. Next, we can hear from Khalil.
Mhm.
All right.
Hello, everyone. My name is Khalil Thompson, and this is Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements. And for today's video, I will be asking some questions for Mr. Brian Neff. And for the first question, tell me what the process is like when it comes to content creating. For the second question, explain how you got into game developing.
All right. Let's.
For the last but not least,
Triple hit.
tell me more about the DFW Nerd Night podcast and how it impacts people. Thank you so much for the people that tuned in. I look forward to the great feedback. Thank you so much.
All right. Content creation. What is that about?
Content creation, just as sort of a very, very top level overview, is just creating any kind of media, whether it be a podcast or, you know, a website or an article or a video, and delivering it to an audience. And so the process of content creation, for me anyway, a lot of times deals with getting past a blank page. The blank page is always going to be the biggest hurdle for me, making sure to get something down, and get something down, you know, in a timely manner. And I think, you know, it's a really big misconception when it comes to content creation and, you know, it especially creatively, that you have to get it right on the first try, that there's, you know, the closer you get and the more time you spend sort of mulling over your idea, the better it's going to be in the end. And that's not true. The more time you spend editing and polishing and all of that sort of stuff, the better it's going to be. And so getting past the initial stages of just having a blank thing sitting in front of you is the most important part of content creation. And it's sort of where you get the most lessons out of that sort of stuff that I found. And then, you know, reaching back a little bit further, the DFW Nerd Night podcast is something that I haven't done in a little bit. DFW Nerd Night still exists, but the podcast was largely the marketing arm of a charity that I still work for, called DFW Nerd Night. And basically the idea of the podcast was to sort of back up for a second, DFW Nerd Night raises money for, you know, all sorts of different charities in the DFW area, and we've went national a couple of years ago. But we partner with charities like Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Dallas Food Bank in order to provide money, you know, through board gaming parties that we throw for free. And so the podcast was a way to reach out to people outside of the DFW area in order to get them involved in our community. You know, and we used it as a launching off point to sort of nationalize a little bit and get other cities, you know, throwing their own Nerd Night parties. And so now we throw 10 parties a month in different cities across the nation, and then we do a couple of larger events at some of these conventions in order to raise money for charity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm wanting to trace back Khalil's follow-up question here. The second part, did we, in between content creator and what is content creation and the DFW Nerd Night content?
What the process is like when it comes to content creating. For the second question, explain how you got into game developing. And for the
All right. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you fell into this? Is the wrong word, because you've actually been. It's the reverse of that. You've been kind of working your way into it, volunteering your way into it. But what are some of the earliest instances where you were involved in gaming communities of different types?
So way back in 2009, was the first time that I ever got paid to do anything in tabletop gaming, and it was for a small little local convention called Texicon down in Dallas, Texas, and they basically gave me a little bit of money to do some organization for them, so to help them with their schedules and project management and a little bit of that sort of stuff. And that was really when it clicked with me that I could ask for money for the things that I was doing.
Right.
And that, like I think, again, a lot of freelancers will tell you, is a really big sort of corner turn, is being able to, value your work and, recognize the parts of your work that people are willing to pay for. And identifying the needs of a lot of people and developing those skills. So.
Yeah, excellent. Let's shift to hear from, let's see, who do we want to hear from next? Let's hear from Liz, Elizabeth, and take her question here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Giles, and this is week 2 of creating social media presence and cultural movements. This week's interviewee is Mr. Brian Neff. He currently works in tabletop gaming development. My question to Mr. Neff is, what exactly does waitressgamesnet consist of?
All right.
Hello, everyone.
So
My name
you
is
have
Liz.
a connection with Waitress Games, quote unquote, right? As part of your portfolio. What is Waitress Games? How can we learn more about this?
So Waitress Games is a company that I helped co-found in 2014. And it is a conglomeration of a lot of designers and developers. Waitressgames.net is the website, and it's a service platform for people who need to have work done on their game, regardless of what type of work it is. So the website consists of sort of a landing page, our portfolio, and then a way to contact us. Using that sort of landing page and giving people a way to sort of contact us has helped us build our portfolio a little bit. So it's been very good for us.
Excellent. And so, is there a type of inquiry people or organizations will make that are more common than others? Is there a standard type of request that you get through that website?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most difficult parts of the process of sort of game development and game design is a process called blind playtesting, which is where we take the game in whatever form it's in, and we put it in front of people who have never been a part of the process before. They haven't seen it before, they didn't help touch design it or anything like that. And we watch them play through it with a rule book, and we see where they have hiccups, the things that they like, where they become disengaged, that sort of stuff. And that is probably the most the service that we get requested the most, because as a person goes through and designs stuff, one of the things that they naturally try and do is show it to as many people that they know. So it's very difficult for them to have a group of people who haven't seen it before. And we sort of help provide that service in order to get it outside of their own network and get some opinions that aren't coming from an echo chamber.
Excellent. Yeah. Feedback is important. And I want to link that back, your commentary, your response to really Liz's inquiry there, to the previous interviewer. We have Khalil, and you made a point about something that you said. You said make more, or rather, the more time you make to edit or give yourself to edit, the better the final product will be. And I think that's a healthy sort of crossover that we can carry through direct application to our students and understanding that we are in this course, and many of the online students are really up against it in a lot of classes because they operate on an accelerated cycle. They're accelerated. There's an upside. They're typically only taking one class at a time, but there's a downside. There's a real challenge to keeping up with various readings and assignments and discussion that we're engaging in, the special projects that we're developing. But sometimes, and we have deadlines for a reason, right? We have deadlines because we need to push through stuff, but also the flip side is deadlines simply can exist to help us complete. The hard part in terms of our individual training and self-discipline is being able to set our own pre-deadlines to get it in early enough that we have the chance to proofread, to follow through and see what holes we can identify so that the final product is as good as possible.
Yeah.
Let's hear from, I think, let's see, Rosalind. Rosalind has a couple of questions, I believe, so let's hear from her now.
Hi, my name is Rosalind Ben, and I'm currently enrolled at Mid-America Christian University.
Name drop.
We are in week 2 of the course entitled Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements, which is being taught by our professor, Dr. Gary Castleberry. Mr. Neff, before I ask you a couple of questions, I would like to say hi and congratulate you on your accomplishments thus far as a young entrepreneur, and thank you in advance for your time. I would also like to say hi and thank you to Dr. Castleberry for opening this door of opportunity.
Thank you.
My first question, Mr. Neff, is when you consider all that you have accomplished in the area of gaming across all spectrums, what has been one of your greatest challenges thus far?
All right, let's stop there. Greatest challenge. A, not the, right? I hate being put on the spot for like number ones of things, but
yeah. The greatest challenge for me, really, in the grand scheme of all of the game design and all of the different work that I've done inside gaming, hasn't really had anything to do with games. The greatest challenge that I've had, I think, so far was creating and building a business. The game design, portion of it, I think comes a little more naturally to me than all of the other parts of what running a business entails. All of the project management and business development and paying taxes and all of that sort of stuff. It wasn't ever a thing that I learned how to do. As Dr. Castleberry will tell you, I have a communication degree. I don't have a business degree. I don't, know any of the sort of professional standards for running a business. So a lot of it in the first couple of years was going in blind. But there are a lot of good resources when it comes to those types of things online, and there's a lot of good growth to be had reaching outside of your own comfort bubble when it comes to creating and trying to push yourself forward like that.
That's you make a great point in that a single degree can't encompass everything, and it's something that I think most of us are aware of, and that's why we try to be selective in that process, but also recognize that's okay too. That college isn't meant to teach us everything. It's meant to give us that next series of skill sets that are going to teach us foundational and fundamental skills, and also give us a or more than a plural knowledge bases with which to sort of enter or transition in certain professional settings. Okay, let's hear Rosalind's follow-up.
My second question is, would you identify one thing that your current customer base has in common? I look forward to your responses and thank you for your time again.
Yeah, so this almost sounds like a demographic question, right? What's a commonality that your clientele share?
Yeah. So in the past couple of years, I have been transitioning towards working more with businesses than with individual people. So a lot of my customers have their own budgets and deadlines and all of that sort of stuff that they are also trying to manage outside of creating a good product. And while that set of needs is pretty diverse depending on the size of the company that I'm working with, a lot of the time it is being able to identify those needs and being able to identify those deadlines and being able to identify that budget and figuring out where I fit inside of that process. So, all of them are working with the same set of the same set of needs that every other business is working with. The need to create a product that is profitable and the need to do it on a deadline. So, sort of tying back into deadlines, being able to set myself up inside of their own framework in order to meet their needs as a business is something that each and every single one of them has in common. And as a second thing that each and every single one of them has in common, they don't always know what it is they need. Sometimes sometimes part of consulting is being able to identify weaknesses in processes and management and things like that. And so being open to that sort of thing and being able to identify that sort of thing is a skill that I've developed in order to meet the needs of a lot of those clients.
I don't know. We don't have a lot of mathematicians in the communication major. That's typical. But for those of you that missed it, I caught a formula listening to Brian just now, and if we see, I think it's to the effect of let's see, right? Needs plus, what's my formula? Needs plus budget plus deadline divided by me, right?
Yep.
That's the formula. I think that's really interesting because also we have to come to a point of recognizing when do we get stretched too thin, or
right.
We need to be aware of the people we're engaging with, whether it's person to person, or at a corporate level, of where are their blind spots, how can we better serve them. I think a forward-thinking model is for us to not be waiting for others to tell us what to do with our ideas and product. We have to be thinking about the questions to help them that they wouldn't be anticipating because they may not be in the creative game the same way. Let's take another question from a different student, and let's hear from Dana. All right.
Guys, Dana Taylor here for my week 2 questions. What skills do you feel are the most important in being a successful game creator?
Oh, okay. Let's stop there. She does have 2 questions. All right. Skills.
Skills for being a game creator are wide and varied, and I think that I think that if you asked a dozen game creators what their skill set was, you'd probably get a dozen different answers back because the field is so wide. But beyond sort of the X factors that I think a lot of different people have, time management, project management, and being able to, as you said, self-set deadlines and sort of break down tasks into smaller, more manageable bits are things that you absolutely need in order to be successful. Game design is big. It's very, very big, and there's a lot of different processes and math and writing and art. So many different things that have to come together perfectly in order to create a product that people want to buy. And that above anything else means that you have to be able to manage all of those pieces and sort of find where you fit in.
All right, let's hear the rest of this segment.
And you've collaborated on several games, but how does your collaborative process work? Thanks.
All right, collaborative process.
Yeah. My collaborative process tends to, again, focus on the place that I'm most useful, and being able to identify where I can sort of leverage my skills in order to drive the process forward. So I work asynchronously a whole lot. I am, in my home office right now, and this is where I spend most of my time. When I'm not traveling, I'm usually here getting work done. And so working asynchronously means that, you have to leverage a lot of tools in order to work at the same level as you would when when you would otherwise be working in an office. So, things like project management tools. We've used a dozen different project management tools. These meeting tools, so things like Google Hangouts and things where you can sort of simulate face-to-face meetings, and then on top of that, all of the documentation and source control and all of that sort of stuff. So Google Docs and Google Sheets and all of that sort of stuff, in order to make sure that we're getting information back and forth to each other in the most efficient way possible.
Can you, and as a follow-up to Dana's question about collaborative process,
mm-hmm.
Can you estimate what the high versus low end is of people you might be collaborating with on an average project?
Sure.
A lot of variability, but
yeah, I work with single-person operations when it's just me interfacing with one other person in order to sort of figure out what their needs are. And then connecting them to other people. And I've worked with companies that have 150 employees. I've worked on several projects that are larger than that, but 100 people I think are the most that has ever touched a project that I've worked on.
Okay.
So yeah, it really runs the gamut.
Excellent. Simone Ferris has a question, or perhaps a two-parter. Let's listen.
Hi, Brian Neff. My name is Simone Ferris. I am a communications degree student at Mid-American Christian University in COM 4603, creating social media and cultural movements. I have a question I'd like to ask, and that is, can you describe the differences between development and design for tabletop board games?
What's the difference in development and design? What are we picking too thinly here, or?
Absolutely not. This is a very, very good question, and it's a question that I wish a lot more people that I worked with knew the answer to. Yeah, there's a pretty big rift between design and development. Design is what you would think of as the idea people. They are the people who come up with all of the cool ideas and write stuff down on note cards and sort of figure out how everything is supposed to work together. They are, the people who they're the writers in movies and TV shows. Developers, on the other hand, are people who try and take those ideas and make them into something that a lot of people want to consume. And one of the things that is important whenever you're talking about the difference between design and development is you can get away with not having a developer. A lot of times people who do design try and take on a lot of the work of development by themselves in order to save money, or because they think that they can do it. But anybody who's been doing this long enough knows that those things really need to be done by two separate people. You need to have as many different professional opinions as you can on whatever your product is, in order to make sure that you're not getting caught up in your own ideas. And that's really what my job is it's to separate out the ideas that aren't going to work for a wider audience, whether it's because they're too complicated, or because they're not explained very well, or things like that. Development is identifying all of those rough edges and then polishing them down to make the whole product look really good.
Excellent. All right. Let me see if there was a follow-up or if I just kind of cut this short here. All right. I thank you for drawing that distinction for us. I know sometimes last week, for example, we talked to a graphic designer, and a graphic designer would have that sort of background in art history, or some kind of baseline there, and then a lot of technical training, and be adept at visualizing concepts and kind of creating reality out of that, whether it's through the use of creative design or math or collaborative process. And in the comm major, we often talk about becoming a content creator, and tend to think about and define a content creator as someone that essentially sounds like your definition of a design person, right? They're conceptualizing content, they're developing ideas, they're asking the kinds of questions that are going to flesh out a project, right? Take it from something flat and kind of give it a well-rounded qualities. So I think recognize that distinction and understanding the difference between the two is helpful, and we likely have folks, heading in both directions, give or take.
Absolutely, and it's different overlapping skill sets, but finding which one you are the most useful in is an important identification. So
excellent. Well, the last student question that is loaded currently in our discussion board, and we thank everyone for their timeliness there. But the last question uploaded is from Erin, and I will let Erin offer up her commentary here.
Hey guys, this is Erin Manuel, and this week we're interviewing Brian Neff. And my questions this week are: waitressgamesnet says you are a back-to-back national debate champion. What is the link between arguing, debate, and the work performed in creating and playing games? My second.
Okay, yeah, that's it. I was just the tone went up, so I was just making sure that was the end. This is a great question, but I didn't mean to step on in your words in any way. Do we need to hear that again, or are you kind of?
No, I got it. So the link between debate and creating games is when I did debate in college, it definitely informed a lot of the rest of my future, and it was definitely one of the most sort of influent and cultivating activities that I took part of when I was there. But debate is really about two very specific concepts. One of them is being able to think laterally, so to find a problem and attack it from a bunch of different angles in order to sort of find the most creative way to tackle an argument. And the second one is following rules. There are a lot of rules around debate about the types of things that you can and can't say, the types of concepts that you can and can't bring in. And so I think those two things map pretty directly to game creation and game design, because a lot of it is about coming up with creative solutions to problems and understanding the rules and the framework of those different concepts and being able to work inside of them in order to make something that's understandable.
Awesome. Oh, very good. A disappearing art form and skill, argumentation, debate,
yeah.
Where we continue to see a defunding of those camps at a wide level, and it's perhaps no surprise that we're also seeing that happen at a time where digital media illiteracy is on the rise, and there's a great need for critical media literacy, as some scholars would argue. All right, let's hear the back part of Erin's questionnaire here.
The second question is, where does your inspiration for games come from? And my third question is, what is the most outrageous idea for a game that a client has given you? Did it work? Why or why not?
Okay. All right. A pair of final questions here. Talk about inspiration.
So I am lucky that I get to work in a field that where I can take my inspiration from a lot of the things that I would sort of normally be doing anyway. I really love reading books. I really love watching movies. I really love, binging TV shows and doing things like that. So being able to take inspiration from those things and, craft stories and narratives around things that are popular and themes and concepts that you see arise a lot is where I get a lot of my inspiration from. And playing a lot of other games, whether they be video games or tabletop games or whatever. Being able to understand why other products and other games are successful and integrate that into the things that I'm working on a day-to-day basis has been pretty important for me.
It's very interesting. You mentioned and described this process of being a media consumer in essence, and being able to enjoy leisure culture in that way, but also finding out how to take those ideas and then use them or apply them. And I think that is an important asterisk for us, because in our communication, media, and ethics degree, we have, whether students, no one's forced to memorize this like the Declaration of Independence, but we have certain outcomes. They are educational outcomes that are written into the documents that sanction this major at this particular university. And one of those 6 major outcomes is that our program will train students to shift from a passive mode of leisurely consumption to an active mode of critical media engagement. And you're describing that process as something that you have learned how to practice and apply. And I just think that's a fantastic educational opportunity to highlight in your own words that you're demonstrating how that type of educational outcome that we set as a kind of standard for us is something that translates immediately to professional fields, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if this wasn't what I did in my day job, being able to pull those lessons from the things that I consume on a daily basis is still super valuable. It helps me, and it helps me engage with content more and gives me a better understanding of the world around me and why things are being created in the way that they are and what people are really trying to say. So
Aaron's follow-up question asked, what was the most outrageous idea that you've ever fielded from a client? Can you go into detail about a story of that nature?
Yeah, one of the most outrageous ideas that I think I was ever approached with was the idea of a consumable tabletop game. Not consumable in like an edible way, but the idea was that you would, it's a bit of a bummer. Although someone, as a tangent, someone did make a tabletop game cookbook where you could cook different pieces and play games with them and then eat them. So I sort of wish I was working on that, but
I think we just passed a law in this state that's going to aid that process, right? The CBD tabletop game, which would be available.
That's a good one. No, but I had a client approach me with a project where at the end of the game the players would have destroyed the entire game. They have ripped it up or written on it or set it on fire. There was a bunch of different proposals for how this process was going to work. But we ended up identifying some good ideas that came out of that, and we came up with a sort of new context for a game called a legacy game, where new content will come out game after game, and you will destroy some of that content, or not use some of it and throw it away, or personalize a lot of the content that comes out of the game. And we've found a ton of success with that sort of model. So, as it sounded like a ridiculous idea when we started thinking about it, but the more we thought about it, it ended up coming with something that's been pretty well received.
I can imagine our students would love sitting in on some of these creative meetings that you are able to engage on a regular basis. This Destroy game, if I recall correctly, if I read it in one of the consumer magazines, you either had to be under like 4 years old or under, or an anarchist, right? Destroy the game. This is excellent. Well, you've talked a lot and shared a bunch of important information in broad terms. Are there some titles of background games, as we're kind of winding down here, that stand out in your own portfolio or personal interest, right? What's something that, if you're at a convention or talking to maybe a new potential audience, how do you turn them on to this concept, right? To essentially sell the old as new, right? In tabletop gaming.
I have a couple of games in my portfolio that I like to introduce people to. The first one is a game that actually was just announced. It's coming out in a couple of weeks, and it's called Machikoro Legacy. And it is the next part in this like sort of legacy concept that we're getting to use. So it's a very sort of low key game where you're building a town and you're collecting resources and sort of building things up, and then it tells you a story over the course of I think it's 10 games, and having people. Watching people engage in that sort of relatively simple game mechanics and being able to tell a personalized story around that has been really, really cool. And when people ask how to play, I just tell them it's basically Yahtzee, because that's all it is. And so we created a very, very sort of fancy looking Yahtzee game, and we told a story around it, and I think we ended up with some pretty good results.
You have, what do my notes say here? You've talked about this creative process and in a number of different ways, but you've also mentioned that process as a young entrepreneur of kind of disciplining and educating yourself into being able to nurture some business responsibilities. Are there some free resources that come to mind, or maybe even those that aren't free, that our students could investigate or check out to develop our creative skills? Is there something that sharpens that side of our brain in your experience?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things that I can think of. On the creative side, I play all sorts of mobile games, specifically puzzle games, on a daily basis. Being able to sort of keep my mind sharp, and do those sorts of things in order to make sure that my brain is always in that mode of thinking, is a really, really good idea. So, like things like crossword puzzles or Sudoku or anything like that, anything that is short and sweet and that you can do daily is a really good way to sharpen your mind. If you are into art or content creation or writing, doing things like using a story prompt generator that'll start you a prompt and you have to write, a one-page story about it, I think is a really, really good daily exercise to do. But the important thing about creating in general is that you have to do it constantly if you want to get better at it. There is some amount of theorizing and figuring out, how good stories are told that'll get you halfway there. But the biggest thing is practice, and I think that's for most skills, right? And a lot of people don't think of content creation and creative writing and art as a skill, but it absolutely is, and it's something that needs to be practiced and nurtured and cultured in order to in order to get you to a place where you're constantly outputting at the best that you can.
That is impeccable advice, Brian. Thank you so much. In a fantastic way to close out our conversation with you here. I love this. You're talking fundamentals and practice and repetition, and it also drives home. I know sometimes we get those helpful and typically constructive, but feedback comments about some of the assignments we offer in courses that do appear a bit repetitive. Oh, it's a healthy reminder to recognize that the repetition is meant to help offset the fact that we're moving at an accelerated pace. And so when you do something once and then all in 5 weeks, you're kind of in another course altogether, it is easy to let that information go, just like we would when we cram for a quiz or an exam, that it's giving us short-term information that we're dumping, right, to use that term, and we're dumping it for the exam, but then we're literally dumping it cognitively after the fact. And the repetition, on the other hand, is helping us sharpen skills, right? So it speaks to various assignments, and more than one, more than two come to mind in that effect. Brian, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk to our class and join us for a session here.
Yeah, well, thank you all for having me, and those were some real great questions, and I appreciate y'all taking the time to listen.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to Brian, and thank you everyone for tuning into these interview sessions, our asynchronous interview series in COM 4603, Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements. We will meet again for our next asynchronous interview in good time. Thank you.